Maybe it's fine. Sure. I just want to make sure you can hear me. So my name is Christina Giorgio, and I'm a lawyer. And I have been living in New York for the last 6.5 years, but recently moved back to my home state, California, and I'm really glad as it relates to certain aspects. But the caulking material, that was something that the EPA decided to sort of take the litigation away from my office. And they agreed to a pilot study with the New York City Department of Education. And this pilot study is being held up as a sort of ultimate study that could be done on PCBs in our school environment. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely not the case. I'm very, very concerned about New York City and the pilot study being done there as being held up as an example of what should be done. I want to point out, and this is sort of echoing what Kurt is saying, these studies that are being done here in Malibu and in New York City, hi everybody over there, these are not scientific studies being done by universities. These are studies being done by paid consultants, environmental firms hired by school districts to determine the risk levels and the concentrations and whatnot. Now think about it. I've worked with many, many consultants in the environmental field. I've litigated against many companies and districts that hire these consultants. And many wonderful people work for these organizations. I do not mean to disparage them, but let's face it, these districts hire these consultants and have a great influence on how their findings are presented. And in this case, I think in Malibu, it's sort of a case in point. The test results came back, the concentrations came back at a certain level when the consultants did the testing. Lo and behold, some independent testing was done and it came back 7,000 times higher. So you have to ask yourself what's going on here. With regard to PCBs, Jennifer and Kurt touched on some of the health impacts, but what really moves me is the impact that PCBs have on the developing brain, the developing nerve system. Children are the most vulnerable population to PCB exposure, and I am extremely troubled that what is being proposed, not only in New York but in Malibu, is to manage this highly toxic compound in place when the law requires it to be removed. You can't take risks with children's health, and that's exactly what is happening here. They want to basically just do air testing. Then they want to do, I think I saw a white glove test. What is that? You know, it's like, you know, walking around with a white glove to see if it's still dirty. That's absurd. White tests don't tell you anything about the actual exposure. And what we found in New York City is that air tests would come back with one result in January and then have radically different air results in the summer. So what comfort can a parent take from air tests that are done perhaps once? So in terms of what I would recommend for this community to do, definitely stay together as you are doing now. It's fantastic seeing so many people come together here. When you come together like this, you will win. Demand that every option be examined, and I will say, in this case, which is very different than New York City, we were dealing with thousands of schools in New York City. We educate over 1 million children in New York City. So some of the considerations are just not an option there. In Malibu, you've got a lot more options. You're dealing with 2 schools. Removing that caulking and removing the substrate is very doable. And you cannot put a dollar amount on a child's health or a child's future. So with that, I just want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Jennifer for all the great work she's been doing in Malibu Unites. I wanted to wear my t-shirt tonight, but I came from my job, so I couldn't wear the t-shirt. But I have the pleasure of introducing your neighbor, Cindy Crawford. So you have probably the smallest speaker now, and introducing the most statuesque speaker that we could have.